Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about the care of 5 different orchids which require a cool rest to trigger blooming: Dendrobium nobile, Cymbidium, Dendrobium kingianum, Coelogyne, and Pholidota chinensis. Winter is a critical time for these orchids, and getting the care right can make all the difference. All of them hail from Southeastern Asia, Australia, and the many islands in between. These areas all experience a monsoon climate. In the winter, the hot air rising over Central Asian deserts draws in moist air from the Pacific, causing persistent rain, especially where the moist air rises towards the Tibetan Plateau. In winter, the Siberian high causes sunny, cold, dry weather, as this weather pattern inverts. Many of these orchids grow in higher elevation hills, where many trees lose their leaves for a brief mild winter, increasing the sunlight in lower levels of the forest. In nature, these changes in light, temperature and moisture signal to the plant that the dry season has begun. It's a waste of energy to blossom in the rainy period when pollinators often cannot easily fly, so such orchids have evolved to grow and save up energy in the rainy season and then to bloom in the dry season. The key is to trick them into thinking that the dry season is here. First up, we have the Dendrobium nobile, also known as the noble dendrobium. This orchid is famous for its stunning flowers, but it needs a proper winter rest to bloom. Here's how to care for it during the colder months. Watering: cut back significantly. Water only when the canes start to shrivel slightly, about every 2 weeks. Overwatering at this point can lead to root rot. Temperature: cool nights are key. Aim for 35 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 to 15 degrees Celsius at night in the autumn, though they can drop down to just about freezing without it harming them as long as there's no frost. Light: while these orchids prefer partial or full shade during the spring and summer, in autumn they prefer to be in bright, direct sun. In more temperate climates, the sunlight weakens at this time of year as the temperature drops. Fertilizer: stop fertilizing during dormancy. Resume in spring when flowers have faded and new growth appears. Humidity: keep it moderate, around 40 to 50%. Remember, a little shriveling of the canes is normal during dormancy. Just don't let them dry out completely. You will see buds forming all along the new canes, slowly swelling before opening in a stunning display. Keep the orchid cool, but once the buds begin to swell, you can increase watering to once per week. If you live in an area with frosts, don't fret too much about the temperature once you bring the plants indoors to protect them. Next, we have the Cymbidium, or the boat orchid, a favorite for its spikes of long-lasting, showy flowers. The name comes from the incredibly showy labellum, the curve of which resembles a sailing ship. Many of these orchids need a winter chill to bloom, though there are also a few, like Cymbidium ensipholium, which have a more tropical distribution and are more warmth-loving. These typically have smaller, more spindly and less showy flowers. Watering: reduce watering substantially once nighttime temperatures drop into the low 50s. Cool nights are a must. Aim for 35 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Daytime temperatures should be about 25 degrees Fahrenheit higher than whatever the nighttime temperature is, give or take. Light, bright, direct light. Once the summer light starts weakening at the end of July and the nights get cooler, Cymbidium should be gradually moved into direct sun. Cymbidiums have a huge seasonal difference in growing requirements. In the summer, up until the nighttime temperatures drop near 55, they should be fed weekly and watered frequently, never being allowed to dry out. Then, once temperatures drop, feeding should stop, maybe give them a few dilute feedings in the early autumn to wean them off. Moderate humidity, around 40 to 60%, is ideal. Cymbidium orchids will put out new growths throughout the summer, and if your plant is going to bloom, it will produce flower spikes in late summer or early to mid-fall at the base of the plant. These look similar to new growths but have a more triangular shape, like a sword point, with a zigzag pattern to them. Once you learn to recognize spikes, they are quite distinctive. However, triggering the blooms is typically not as difficult as keeping them. Until the blooms are fully opened, Cymbidiums have a tendency to suffer from bud blast. The sudden moving of the plant to an area with a big change in temperature, especially a hot temperature over 70, will often cause the plant to abort the buds, leading to them shriveling and falling off. This is a painful experience after you've cared for the plant all year. We keep ours in an unheated garage with grow lights once the frost has set in and water them once every couple of weeks until the flowers fully open. Sometimes several spikes can be staggered, with one opening early and others later. The flowers will always last longer in cooler temperatures, so whether you want to bring them inside is a personal decision. We typically do once half the flowers are opened so we can enjoy them in the house. Now let's talk about Dendrobium kingianum, also known as the pink rock orchid. This hardy orchid is a great choice for beginners due to its idiosyncratic care requirements. It is native to eastern Australia and is a lithophyte, where it grows clinging to limestone cliffs. One of the odd things about it is its ideal potting mix. We grow ours in a mix which is mostly rocks and pebbles. Stop watering for several weeks at a time. Cool to intermediate temperatures, around 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, are ideal. It can even handle brief drops to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, light bright sun in the autumn. Move these plants into direct sun in August. This is an orchid which will grow several keikis in the summer. We remove these around this time. You can pot them up separately or add them to the same pot to help it to fill out. Stop fertilizing during winter. Moderate humidity, around 40 to 50%, is perfect. This orchid is tough and forgiving, making it a great addition to any collection. It also multiplies like crazy due to heavy keiki production in the summer. If you botch the cold period, the plants will continue to produce keikis into winter. If you got it right, you will see little buds start to grow from the tips of the plants. A key difference between Dendrobium kingianum and Dendrobium nobile is that the former can also bloom on old pseudobulbs, whereas Dendrobium nobile only blooms from new growths. If you aren't seeing buds by January, try moving it somewhere a little warmer and start watering it a little bit more, maybe once a week. This can help to trigger a bloom or can cause it to go back into its regular growth cycle, in which case you should resume heavier feeding and watering. Next up is the genus Coelogyne. Known for its airy, elegant flowers, most Coelogyne species benefit from a cooler, drier winter rest. Here's what you need to do. Reduce watering, but don't let the pseudobulbs shrivel excessively. Water sparingly, about once every week. Temperature, cool to intermediate temps, around 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 to 21 degrees Celsius are ideal. Some species prefer cooler nights. Light, bright, indirect light is best. Avoid direct midday sun. Fertilizer, stop fertilizing during dormancy. Humidity, moderate to high humidity, around 50 to 70% is ideal. These orchids love humidity, so consider using a humidity tray or humidifier if your home is dry. They don't need quite the brutal cold rest of the other orchids, they just like to stay a bit cooler. Blooms will come out at the base of the old pseudobulbs like a long spear point. Strangely, once it is done blooming, this growth will swell and transform into a new pseudobulb. While some are fragrant, the scent can be either pleasant or interesting, to put it nicely, but the ones that don't smell very good usually aren't noticeable unless you get right up into the flowers. A very interesting orchid. Finally, we have Pholidota chinensis, a cool-growing orchid that prefers a slight winter rest. This is also known as the rattlesnake orchid due to the young cream to pink-coloured flower buds, resembling the rattle on a rattlesnake's tail. They grow very similar to Coelogyne, also emerging from what will become new pseudobulbs and have similar care. The spikes are more numerous, yet smaller. Ours has 14 buds this year. Reduce watering, but ensure the pseudobulbs don't shrivel excessively. Water sparingly, about once or twice a week. Temperature cool to intermediate temps, around 50 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 to 24 degrees Celsius are ideal. Cooler nights are beneficial. Light, bright, indirect light is best. Avoid direct sun. Fertilizer. Stop fertilizing during winter. Humidity, moderate to high humidity, around 50 to 70% is perfect. This orchid is a bit of a hidden gem from an obscure genus, but with the right care, it'll thrive and bloom profusely. Before we wrap up, here are some general winter care tips that apply to all these orchids. Light. Make sure the light lovers get a dose of bright sunlight at some point in their dormancy. We typically put them into direct sun in the fall for several weeks, leading up to the first frost. I've found that it's not necessary to maintain bright light for the remainder of the rest period. I typically leave ours in a cool north-facing window. However, if you cannot leave them outside in the fall, make sure they get light inside. Airflow. Good air circulation is key to preventing fungal or bacterial issues. Pests. Keep an eye out for pests like mealybugs or spider mites, especially in dry indoor conditions. Water quality. Always use cold water to avoid confusing the plant. We typically use water that is 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Avoid warm wind. Keep your orchids away from heating vents, fireplaces and wood stoves. Avoid shock. Try to avoid changing the temperature where your orchids are stored too drastically, or avoid moving them suddenly from a very cold environment to a very warm one. It is safer to do this once the flowers are open, but bud blast is a real risk if the flowers are still closed. Finally, know when to throw in the towel. Sometimes you miss the triggers, or a particular orchid just isn't feeling up to blooming for whatever reason. Trying to torture them into doing so isn't doing anyone any favors. Once they go back into active growth, give them warmth, feeding and more water. I found that orchids that miss a year of blooming often put on an even more spectacular display the next year with all that energy that they've saved up. And that's it. With these tips, you'll be well on your way to keeping your orchids healthy and happy through the winter. Remember, each species has its own unique needs, so tailor your care accordingly. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching and happy growing.